Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. All right, so the first thing I want to start with today is the Assange ruling. So it was kind of a strange ruling. It was a little confusing, but it's basically his extradition has been delayed and he might have a chance to appeal, but the U.S. has a chance to stop it. So again, it's kind of strange. And we ran this article from Kevin Gosztola at his website, The Dissenter, because he explains it very well. So I'll read from his article. The British High Court of Justice partially granted WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's request to appeal and delayed his extradition to the United States. However, the U.S. government was given an opportunity to provide assurances that may result in his extradition in the next months. So Assange was granted permission to appeal on certain grounds, not on all of the grounds that they requested. So he was granted permission to appeal on the grounds that extradition may violate his right to freedom of expression. The court accepted that he may face prejudice due to the fact that he's not a U.S. citizen. They were arguing that they might not apply the First Amendment to him because he's Australian and he's not an American citizen. And also on the grounds that the prosecution may expose him to the death penalty, which is barred under extradition law. So the court refused to allow Assange to appeal on the grounds that the U.S. is prosecuting him for his political opinions, that extradition would violate his right to a fair trial, and that extradition would violate his right to life or expose him to cruel and inhumane treatment. So the court also rejected Assange's request to include fresh evidence related to the alleged plot by CIA Director Mike Pompeo and other CIA officials to kidnap or kill Julian Assange. That was that huge bombshell report that came out from Yahoo News. Somehow, the fact that the CIA was discussing this is not allowed to be used as evidence for this appeal. So U.S. officials were encouraged by the court to offer assurances that Assange would be protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, that he would not be prejudiced at trial as a result of his nationality, and that the death penalty will not be imposed. So it's kind of strange. And Stella Assange, Julian Assange's wife, condemned the high court for, quote, inviting a political intervention from the United States to send a letter saying that it's all okay. I found this astounding. The Biden administration should not issue assurances. They should drop this shameful case that should never have been brought. Julian should never have been imprisoned for a single day, end quote. So if the U.S. government submits such assurances, which they are likely to do, prosecutors in the U.S. Justice Department may avert a limited appeal. So they could avert this appeal altogether. They have until April 16th to offer these assurances, and then a hearing is going to be held on May 20th if the U.S. government submits them. So we'll see what happens. Again, kind of a strange ruling. It's good-ish news, I guess, because the extradition was delayed, but I mean, it could have been much better, and we'll see. If they just take the U.S.'s word for it, then that's it. No appeal, and he's going to get extradited. So I think the thing for us to do is still try to put pressure on Congress and make noise about this case, get it, more people talking about it, get more attention on it, more eyes on it, because with everything that's going on, I feel like just not enough people are really talking about Assange in this case. And of course, if he is extradited and convicted for doing journalism, that's what they're going to put him on trial for. It's going to just set such a bad, grave precedent here in the U.S. for press freedom and around the world. So go check out Kevin's article. There's more detail in there if you want to get a better picture of this whole mess. All right, so the next story here to get into the Israel-Gaza stuff. Lloyd Austin says that the U.S.-Israel security bond is unshakable. So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin hosted Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in Washington on Tuesday and declared the U.S.-Israel military relationship is unshakable as the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza continues. So Austin said in remarks welcoming Gallant, quote, "Yoav, your security bond, our security bond is unshakable. The United States is Israel's closest friend, and that won't change," end quote. Austin also detailed his close coordination with Gallant since October. He said, quote, I've been to Israel twice since that awful day of October 7th, including just 6 days after Hamas assaulted your country. And we've spoken by phone nearly 40 times, end quote. So they've spoken quite a bit. That's a lot for a Secretary of Defense to speak with another nation's defense minister. So the purpose of Gallant's trip was to ensure continued U.S. support for Israel's military and to ask for more weapons. U.S. officials told CNN that he was expected to ask for precision-guided munitions, so more bombs, and F-35 and F-15 fighter jets. There's this big fighter jet deal in the works that Israel wants to be pushed through. So Austin paid lip service to this idea that the U.S. was concerned about civilian casualties, about the massive civilian death toll. But the U.S. military support continues. At the end of the day, Gallant, is going over there basically giving them a wish list for more weapons. And this comes after Netanyahu canceled the other Israeli delegation that was supposed to go to Israel to discuss the attack on Rafah. So it goes to show, even though there's kind of this public spat between Netanyahu and the Biden administration, at the end of the day, you still have Gallant there, probably getting exactly what he wants from the U.S. And I mean, again, so there was the rhetoric from Lloyd Austin saying that the civilian casualty rate is too high. He warned them about Rafah. He said, you can't go in there if you don't have a way to protect the civilians. But at the end of the day, he also declared this support, this unshakable support, which sounds like unconditional U.S. military support for Israel, despite all these atrocities that they're committing. All right, so the next one here, Israel blames the UN resolution for the lack of a hostage deal with Hamas. So Israel is withdrawing its negotiators from Qatar and is blaming the lack of a hostage deal with Hamas on a UN Security Council resolution that called for a Ramadan ceasefire in Gaza. So Hamas officials said on Monday that the Palestinian group was still seeking a hostage deal that included a permanent ceasefire and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and this is a position that Israel has repeatedly rejected. So Netanyahu's office said in a statement, quote, Hamas's stance clearly demonstrates its utter disinterest in a negotiated deal and attests to the damage done by the UN Security Council's resolution, end quote. The statement continued, quote, Hamas has once again rejected an American compromise proposal and has repeated its extreme demands: an immediate halt to the war, the complete withdrawal of the IDF from the Gaza Strip, and leaving in place its administration so that it can repeat time and again the massacre of October 7th as it has promised to do, end quote. So what's interesting is that the U.S. actually rejected Netanyahu's claim that the Security Council resolution was to blame. State Department spokesman Matt Miller said that Netanyahu's position was, quote, inaccurate in almost every respect, and it's unfair to the hostages and their families, end quote. He also said that Hamas prepared this statement before the resolution was passed. And then I just get into a little more of this Netanyahu being angry at the U.S. The U.S. has been downplaying the resolution, saying that it's non-binding and won't impact Israeli military operations. But the UN and other member states, including I saw the UK, was saying it should be implemented. They're disputing this claim from the US, saying that the resolution is binding and must be followed. Realistically, there's no way to enforce this. These UN Security Council resolutions. But the fact that the U.S. is saying that, because again, it just goes to show the way that they pick and choose to use international law, use the UN when it suits their interests. All right. The next one here, 12 Palestinians drowned trying to retrieve dropped aid. So this article is from CNN, and it says at least 12 Palestinians drowned off the northern Gaza coast near Bet Lahia on Monday, while trying to reach airdropped parcels that had landed in the sea, according to local paramedics. Footage obtained by CNN shows hundreds of Palestinians rushing to the site of the aid drop, with some venturing into the water as parcels crashed down on the shores of Gaza. One graphic scene shows civilians performing CPR on several unresponsive bodies in a desperate attempt to resuscitate them. Abu Muhammad, who witnessed the incident, told CNN that the aid was dropped far from the coast into the sea, after which multiple men who don't know how to swim drowned while trying to retrieve it. So showing the desperation here. So this Abu Muhammad said, quote, "There were strong currents and the parachutes fell in the water. People want to eat and are hungry. I haven't been able to receive anything. The youth can run and get these aid drops, but for us, it's a different story. We call for the opening of the crossings in a proper fashion, but these humiliating methods are not acceptable," end quote. And earlier this month, at least 5 people were crushed by aid drops where the parachutes didn't open. And Hamas is apparently calling on the Western U.S. and other Western countries to end the airdrops, saying that the delivery method is offensive, wrong, inappropriate, and useless. They're saying let the aid trucks in. Apparently, there's thousands of aid trucks lined up in Egypt, just waiting to go in. But the U.S. is doing taking these extreme measures instead of just really putting the pressure on Israel. All right, so the next one here, where are the U.S. ships on the Gaza aid mission now? So this is interesting. This is from Kelly Vlahos at Responsible Statecraft, and it says that the Army and Navy ships that have left the U.S. for a massive humanitarian aid project in Gaza are still making their way across the Atlantic, which with 2 still at ports in Florida and Virginia. It will likely take until mid-April for the vessels to reach Gaza and begin building a temporary causeway for aid. Looking at real-time satellite imagery tracking military vessels, it looks like some of the Army support vessels that left earlier this month on March 10th, one of them has been in the Azores, on the islands in the middle of the Atlantic. It's Portugal, technically, but I've actually been there. It's really cool, the Azores. But anyway, so it's going to take a while for them to get there. And this whole thing is just such a disaster. And of course, there's the idea that maybe this isn't actually an aid project. Maybe there's something more nefarious going on, considering that it was Netanyahu's idea. But it goes to show, I mean, if it is to get aid in, it's not going to be, the construction hasn't even started. The ships haven't even gotten there. You know, people are starving right now. So how many people are going to die between now and the time that this project is done? All right, so the next one here, Israeli airstrikes in Syria kill an Iranian and a World Health Organization official. So suspected Israeli airstrikes hit targets across eastern Syria's Deir ez-Zor province early Tuesday, killing a member of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and an official working for the World Health Organization. So Syrian media said that the strikes hit a number of residential areas and military sites. Damascus actually blamed the attacks on the U.S. They were initially reported as U.S. airstrikes. The U.S. denied involvement in the strikes. The Pentagon denied that it was them. And Israeli sources told media outlets, told Ynet and Haaretz, and I believe at this point it's been reported by a lot more media outlets now, that the Israeli military was responsible. I think it's possible maybe the Israeli planes launched these strikes from the direction of the U.S. military bases. Who knows, maybe the U.S. was involved in some way, but they're not taking credit. But this is concerning. I mean, they killed another Iranian, another member of the IRGC, who was based in Syria, and Iranian media confirmed that he was killed. This, of course, risks Iranian retaliation and a major regional war. They've killed several IRGC officers over the past few months in Syria. And the World Health Organization, they said that one of its engineers, someone named Ahmad Shahab, was killed in the strikes on his building. The organization said that he was the official involved in water, sanitation, and hygiene projects in the province since 2022. Syrian media reported that a total of 8 people were killed in the strikes, 7 members of the military, and 1 civilian. The report also said that 19 soldiers and 13 civilians were wounded in the attack, which Syrian media blamed on U.S. occupation forces. and the U.S. has occupied eastern Syria for years. They occupy part of the Deir ez-Zor province where these strikes were launched. So the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in the UK, they're very anti-Assad, but they said a total of 15 people were killed, and they counted it as the IRGC advisor and 2 of his bodyguards. So that's 3 people, and 9 Iraqi militia members, so that's 12, and then 2 Syrians working with the Iranians, and 1 Syrian engineer, who I presume is the World Health Organization official. So, and then those numbers aren't confirmed, but this is another risk. If they did kill those Iraqi Shia militia members, this doesn't just risk direct war with Iran. There's, of course, the risk that they retaliate against this by starting to target U.S. bases again, which they have stopped doing in response from pressure from Iraq, from the Iraqi government, and from Iran. Iran also told them to knock it off after the U.S. troops were killed at Tower 22 in Jordan. So that could start up again when you have these big, these seem like they're pretty significant strikes. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes deep into northeastern Lebanon, killing 2. This is one from Jason Ditz. Israeli warplanes carried out its deepest airstrikes yet in northern Lebanon. This was on Tuesday, targeting a Hezbollah compound in the Baalbek district used by one of the group's aerial units. So this is far from the Israeli border, about 130 kilometers, I believe. 130 kilometers beyond the border, making it the deepest Israel has struck since the current conflict began in October. So this situation continues to escalate, and of course there's the risk of this turning into a full-blown war, although it seems like Hezbollah is not interested in that. And so far we haven't seen Israel launch any sort of ground incursion. All right, so the next one here, America has no Ukraine plan B except more war. So this is from Asia Times by a guy named David P. Goldman. This is an interesting article. So he was at some sort of conference earlier, I think he said this month. He says, somewhere last weekend, a few dozen former cabinet members, senior military officials, academics, and think tank analysts met to evaluate the world military situation. And basically what he says is, these are former officials. He doesn't name anybody, but I guess he couldn't share too much information about this event. But he's basically saying that these kind of think tankers, former officials, have this meeting about Ukraine. And in the face of what's happening, Ukraine taking these battlefield losses, and Russia building up its military and industrial capacity, they're still saying, no negotiations. We're going to keep going here. So the messaging from the most distinguished participants, former cabinet members with defense and national security portfolios, is that NATO is still determined to win at any cost. They make some claims about Russian casualties that Goldman says are completely false. And they get into, he just kind of goes over the dire situation that Ukraine is in, but they're still going for it here. So another person at this meeting denounced Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz and other European leaders for worrying too much about the nuclear threshold, the point of escalation after which Russia might use nuclear weapons. They're saying, don't worry about that. Keep sending these weapons. And this guy demanded that Germany supply its long-range Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine with a 1,000-kilometer range and 2-stage warheads suitable for destroying major infrastructure. And that was that leaked conversation between German military officers that was published by Russia. They were actually discussing using these Taurus missiles to destroy the Kerch Bridge that connects Crimea to the Russian mainland. So, and they said not a word was said about a possible negotiated solution. So this is the attitude that these people have. After all this time, after all these people were killed, and Ukraine is, just such a much worse position than it was in 2 years ago. They're still saying, keep this thing going, send more, keep it going. All right, so the next one here, the Russian FSB says that the US, the UK, and Ukraine may have been involved in the Moscow terrorist attack. So this is Alexander Bortnikov. He is the head of Russia's Federal Security Service. He said on Tuesday that the US, the UK and Ukraine could have been involved in this terrorist attack on a concert hall outside of Moscow that killed 139 people. He was asked he was talking to reporters and said that Russia was trying to identify everyone who was involved in the massacre, from the shooters to people who might have orchestrated it. And he was asked, do you think these countries might be involved? And he said, quote, "We think that is so. In any case, we are now talking about the information that we have. This is general information, but the investigators also have concrete results," end quote. So this is, of course, concerning, because how might Russia escalate if they believe Ukraine was involved in this attack, if they believe the U.S. and British intelligence was involved in this attack? The ISIS affiliate based in Afghanistan, known as the Islamic State Khorasan province, or ISIS-K, has taken credit for the attack, and this claim has been backed by the U.S. The U.S. came out and said it was ISIS. It definitely wasn't Ukraine, while Russia is still investigating it, so that's a little suspicious. And I think, judging by ISIS-K's recent pattern of attacks and behavior, I think it's certainly possible that it was them, but there's also all sorts of questions about who might have helped them, facilitated the attack. And Putin said on Monday that radical Islamists carried out the attack, but he suggested Ukraine could have been involved. He was saying, we got to find out who ordered it. And he said it was suspicious that the U.S. is trying to convince everybody that Ukraine had nothing to do with this. I just give some examples of the stuff that Ukraine has done inside Russia. We've seen the assassinations, most infamously the killing of Daria Dugina. They also killed, I forget his name, but he was a Russian military journalist who they killed in St. Petersburg in a cafe bombing. So those types of attacks. And we know from recent reporting from the Washington Post and the New York Times that the CIA helped build up these Ukrainian intelligence agencies that are responsible for these attacks inside Russia. They've also been launching a lot of drone attacks inside Russia, artillery shelling. And also there's been this Russian volunteer corps, which is a militia supposedly made up of Russians who are fighting for Ukraine. And their leader is an open neo-Nazi, skinhead guy. It's a neo-Nazi militia that's been launching these attacks into border regions, and they're armed with American armored vehicles. So, some of these, it's not out of the realm of possibilities, I don't think, for Ukraine to have done some sort of cooperation with ISIS, but it's total speculation. I have no idea. It's just, I'm saying basically, it's not out of the realm of possibilities is all I'm saying here. And of course, the big concern is that if Russia determines that or believes that, what is the implication there? What's the response going to be? Who knows what that could lead to. So definitely concerning. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine demands more weapons, says, give us the damn Patriots. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Ukraine is demanding more weapons out of the U.S. Of course, the aid has still been delayed. And so during an interview with Politico, Ukraine's foreign minister demanded that the West send Kiev more missile defense ammunition. The official said that Ukrainian forces were losing ground due to insufficient ammunition. So this is Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister. And he said, quote, give us the damn Patriots. If we had enough air defense systems, namely Patriots, we would be able to protect not only the lives of our people, but also our economy from destruction, end quote. And of course, Russia has been really ramping up the missile strikes on energy infrastructure and things like that in Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, the Pentagon denies using an occupied Yemeni island to fight the Houthis. This article is from Connor Eccles at Responsible Statecraft. And this is interesting. So the Department of Defense is denying a report, which I missed, that says that the U.S. is sending military reinforcements and missile defense batteries to the Yemeni island of Socotra, which sits near the mouth of the Red Sea, in order to fend off Houthi attacks. A Pentagon spokesperson told Responsible Statecraft that there are no U.S. forces present on Socotra. Sky News Arabia first reported last week that U.S. officials chose to place troops on Socotra due to Saudi restrictions on the use of its airspace or territory to conduct attacks on the Houthis. which is really interesting. The fact that the Saudis are not letting them use their airspace. I mean, it's not interesting. It's actually really pathetic. It just goes to show not that the Saudis aren't letting them, but the fact that the U.S. is bombing Yemen and the Saudis are saying, hey, we don't want anything to do with it. I mean, it's just insane. As someone who followed the war in Yemen very closely when it was the Saudis, and the UAE and conducting this horrific bombing campaign. But anyway, so Saudi Arabia has also forbidden American forces from using missile defense batteries that it has in Saudi territory to fend off Houthi attacks, according to this report. So it's interesting. And if this does turn out to be true, that they're sending U.S. forces to Socotra, it raises significant legal questions, given that the UAE, alongside Yemeni separatists, have quietly taken over the island in recent years, an apparent violation of Yemeni sovereignty. So this is occupied by the UAE, this island, and the Southern Separatists, the Southern Transitional Council that they support. And I believe I've seen reports that there's British soldiers on this island. So I don't think it's out of the question, even though the U.S. is denying it. Maybe they're going to help the British reinforce some stuff there or something like that. All right, so the last story here, the U.S. and Japan to strengthen military ties. So next month, the U.S. and Japan are expected to announce the most significant change to their military alliance since the 1960s, which was when they signed their Mutual Defense Treaty. And this is as the U.S. is bolstering its forces in the region to prepare for a future war with China. So according to Financial Times, the U.S. and Japan will unveil a plan to restructure the U.S. military command in Japan to strengthen operational planning and exercises between the two nations when Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visits the White House on April 10th. So that's just a couple weeks away. He's going to be in D.C. And there's not too much detail about what this will mean. The only thing the report really says is that it will give the head of U.S. forces Japan more authority to coordinate with Japan's military rather than having to go through U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, which is based in Hawaii. So other details of the plan are unclear, but it could be related to Japan increasing its military capabilities, as the U.S. has been encouraging Tokyo to move away from its post-World War II constitution, which renounces war and says that armed forces with war potential should never be maintained. So some people call it a pacifist constitution, but they've kind of been moving away from this for a long time. And it was Shinzo Abe that really got the ball rolling, I think, in 2015. He was the Japanese prime minister who was actually assassinated and killed. It was after he was in office, but I forget. That was just was that a few years ago now when he was killed? But anyway, the current government, they've really ramped this up. And at the end of 2022, Japan announced it was increasing its military budget by 56%, and that they're going to acquire Tomahawk missiles, which will be the longest range missiles that they have. They have a range of over 1,000 miles. And this, again, goes against this pacifist constitution that was imposed on Japan by U.S. occupation forces, but now the U.S. is encouraging Japan to build up its military, and it's all about China. Japan has said so explicitly, just like the U.S., that this is about China. So this is something to keep an eye on, and a lot of people don't realize that the largest foreign military presence, the largest foreign U.S. military presence is in Japan. It hosts over 53,000 American troops, and about 70% of the U.S. bases in Japan are in Okinawa, and Okinawa only accounts for 0.6% of Japan's territory, so they take on most of the burden. And if you know anything about Okinawa, the people of Okinawa are very against this. They want a reduction in the U.S. military presence. It's causing all sorts of sort of environmental damage, but that doesn't matter to Washington. That doesn't matter to Tokyo. They're actually forcing the construction of the relocation. Some U.S. base needs to be relocated. The governor refused to sign off on it, and the federal government, the Japanese central government, overrode the governor and started the construction. The governor of Okinawa is very against. He's very explicitly wants the U.S. to close down bases in Okinawa, but that doesn't matter. This is a very strategic location for the U.S., especially in a future war. If they fight a future war with China. All right, so that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. One from Ariel Gold. Israel's conscientious objectors stand on the shoulders of giants. One from Rick Sterling. Gazans tell what it's like to live under the Israeli siege. And one from Jeremy Kuzmarov. 22 years later, Guantanamo Bay prison remains a monstrosity. One from Kim Robinson, Collateral Murder 2.0, about that horrific video of the Israeli drone strike killing those unarmed Palestinian men. And our spotlight is the story from David Goldman that I went over about his experience at this with these former U.S. officials who are just want more war in Ukraine. So please go check all of that out. You could always support this show by sharing it. Like, subscribe on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, wherever you watch. Follow us on Instagram. Posts are looking really good there. Follow us on Twitter. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.